Welcome to the Independent Artist Podcast, sponsored by the National Association of Independent Artists.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. I'm Will Armstrong, and I'm a mixed media artist.
I'm Douglas Sigworth, glassblower. Join our conversations with professional working artists. All right, everyone, we'll see how this goes today. Will and I are literally pressing pause on a super busy schedule, and we're kind of all over the place.
Bah humbug to you, sir. How are things?
Things are good. Things are good. But you know what? We're not the only ones, I'm sure, going through all this. I bet a lot of listeners out there are trying to wrap everything up for the holidays and just, do the end of year stuff going on here.
Yeah, and hats off to the jewelers out there. They seem to be getting hit extra hard always this time of year, or I guess I hope they are. I don't know.
Right.
It's a blessing and a curse, obviously, because you're busy and you can't really get into the family, and you are constantly doing new commissions and trying not to say no to work. So yeah, it's an anxiety-ridden time for a lot of folks, and especially those giftable crafters and artists out there. So hang in there. It's almost over.
We've been actually working our website since the last show, getting ready for this shutdown, where we still want to make sales of things that we have on hand. So I've been playing around with different ways to take photographs and present them online, and we've been having some good success with it. So I kind of feel like what you're describing with jewelers is what we're going through right now with those holiday orders, people getting them in before.
And they never want the shit that's in stock. They want the thing that's still on your website that you haven't taken down, that it's like, oh, I'll just have this. And be like, okay, don't want to say no. Let me go make that real quick.
Totally.
So I've got a commission working right now that's on the easel that honestly should ship tomorrow, that is about a quarter of the way done. So we'll see how the rest of this day goes.
That's right.
I'm excited. I haven't seen my parents in a while. They're coming into town tomorrow, and they'll be here for 5 days. The kids get off of school. My oldest crushed it in her exam, so that's always good.
That's great.
That's exciting, Yeah. She does a lot better in school than I ever did. She gets all stressed out about studying for things, and I'm like, it didn't get it for me.
Studying, what's that?
Yeah.
So you're back from a show. Tell everyone about Chicago and anything you want to share.
You know what? Everybody I talked to, just down across the board, especially 2D. 2D artists were way down across the board. The sky is falling. So tighten up your panties. We've got a recession. That's my prediction. So,
or it's just craziness in the news cycle and uncertainty in a lot of areas. People tend to be a little more hesitant when that stuff's going on.
I guess maybe I've milked this show for too long, but I did not have a particularly good weekend. And I got tired of doing that, having no sales. So I just started posting everything online and had an okay thing through Instagram.
We've given that kind of a break because of all the in-person stuff, but that is kind of our Hail Mary at the end of the year, isn't it? The online stuff?
Yeah, I guess it is. I've got some, I created some small things that I thought would be giftables, but they ended up being better accent pieces for previous clients. So I had previous clients bite at those pieces that I thought would be giftables for this show instead. So that, and honestly, I had enough work to finally kind of give to my gallery that's up there in Chicago too, that has been kind of starved for original work. So that's good. I've got my irons in the fire, and it's just kind of a bummer.
So does your gallery secretly hope you have a crappy show so that you can fill them up with inventory on the way out of town?
The gallery is owned by another couple that are independent artists. So I know that they don't wish that on me, but at the same time, they're happy to have the work. How about that?
There we go.
I feel like
threading the needle.
Shaking hands and kissing babies, Douglas. That's what I'm doing. It's a political answer.
That's right.
So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's when you don't crush it at your last show, it's a little hard to get psyched for the holidays and buy a bunch of shit that nobody needs. I had one of the networks on, and I was watching, and they were having like last minute gift ideas, and it just, I was watching that stuff, and I'm like, God, it just looked like so much landfill.
Oh yeah.
Just plastic crap that people don't need or want. That was like, I don't know. The whole thing goes around where people are talking about, buy from independent artists. It's like, yeah, but like 2 weeks ago, do
yeah, right.
Do it a while ago. I don't, it's too much now. Now don't.
Yeah. Well, do you ever feel like certain, like, depending on how your year went, if your gifts for the year for those around you kind of turn into your creations that you make for gifts instead of having to go out and buy them? Do you ever do that?
Yeah, yeah, I do. And it's funny. It's like if I land on the perfect gift, then I'm super psyched.
Mm-hmm.
So one artist that I met over this past weekend was somebody that I'd never seen before, and
Cool.
I love some hand blown glass, functional glass, like
Yeah.
rocks glasses, and my
Oh,
wife and I have been.
I'm
looking
guessing
for...
you're going to say Dante Germain.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
know
he's
him?
awesome. He's from our area here. He's a young up and comer. I'm really really excited to see where his career takes off. He's great.
Yeah, for sure. And he had another artist who was just kind of assisting him for the weekend, and
Hmm.
I looked them up too, and they're super talented. But Dante Germain, and I'm just going to give him a shout out because I was walking by and I just responded to the aesthetics of
Hmm.
the work and not exactly like the story of it. And so I looked and I was like, oh, picked it up. I'm like, it's like a whiskey glass in my hand. And I'm like, this feels amazing. I want to pick up a couple of these. Then I went back to my booth and I'm whatever. And then I ran back over there right at breakdown. And I apologize for hitting him as he's packing up, but dropped a little cash on these. But so, okay, you take my brother-in-law, right?
Yeah.
He's a high-powered attorney in Minneapolis, super high anxiety, getting tired of the grind, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So he and his whole family, like one of their big getaways is to go up to Duluth, walk around Lake Superior and hunt for rocks.
Mm-hmm.
And another getaway that he likes to do is to have a nice whiskey at the end of the day.
Okay.
And so I'm like, I picked this thing up and he's hand blowing this work into found rocks from different areas.
That is so cool. Yeah, I totally love what he does.
It's just so cool. It's like, well, here's your perfect thing. And I didn't even realize the story behind it. So shout out to Dante Germain. Killer work. And honestly, you won Christmas for me, sir. So thanks.
Perfect.
There.
Perfect gift. That's awesome. Well, we made gifts this year, and it's been a while since we've done that, but it takes me back to when we first started blowing glass. And our first year, like in 1994, every single gift we gave was glass. And people were like, oh my God, this is so cool. We're so excited to see what you're doing. Yeah, but the novelty kind of wore off around like 1999. They're like, wonder what we're getting this year.
Oh man, I had done a series of like little sculptures for my mom, this like whole series of elves, and
Oh yeah.
I wanted to get into claymation, and so they were like done out of Sculpey, and they looked very much like little claymation characters, and I thought that's what I wanted to do when I was in my early 20s, and so I got pretty good at it, and but she loves them, and I made this whole like world of them, but she wants those every year, and I finally just had to. I was like, look, I just can't.
Okay.
You're ruining Christmas.
You're
like
stressing
I'm making
me out.
I'm like, I can't do it anymore.
Oh.
So no, I mean, I've definitely given gifts, but that to me sounds more stressful right now than credit card debt.
There you go. Well, speaking of being stressed out, it was kind of a fun attempt for us to do a recording with you in Chicago last week.
Yeah.
The hotel that you were at actually had a podcasting studio. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, it is, but it reminded me of radio days.
Yeah.
You'd have the show in front of you would do like real DJ work, like turntable work and do like hip hop scratching and looping things. And they'd bring their own setup in and they'd plug it all in. And it was pretty cool to have that kind of show on, except for the fact that they just unplug everything out of the back and you were just left with loose wires and limited experience on how to plug it all back in. And that's what I ended up with this year. So last year it worked. It was super cool. This year it was a huge pain in the ass and we had to delay the episode by a week.
Yeah, I mean, that was so much fun last year to, the day after the show and kind of a new setting and everything. But yeah, I know your struggle with plugging all this stuff in, and when like the drivers aren't updated and things aren't working, there's like no getting over it. And we're trying to squeeze this in like an hour before you actually have to go to work and sell your stuff. So that was a nightmare.
I did have a showing that morning and then took a a taxi back across town to get back to the hotel in order to do that. And my pocket was fat because they wanted they wanted to pay in cash. So I had the dirty pillow in my pocket and scrambling to try to plug in. You were super patient. You know who wasn't super patient with the whole...
Are we giving him a shout out for this one?
Absolutely. He was very disappointed.
I'm so sorry.
Oscar De La Matos. He was very disappointed in us for not having the episode ready for his listening pleasure. So we're so sorry, sir. I apologize. Hopefully this is a nice soundtrack to whatever the hell you have going on this week.
We have to roll with it, right? We just rolled with it.
Yeah, definitely. So appreciate your patience and your loyal listenership. Is listenership a word? Is that a word?
If it isn't, it is now.
All right. Okay.
Sounds like something I hear on Minnesota Public Radio when they're on a member drive. Thank you for your listenership.
Oh, very nice. It is a word.
Yeah.
Hey, you ever forget that you're talking to people just besides me? You ever do that? You're
saying, do I ever just start talking to somebody and thinking it's you, or what are you saying?
No. Like when you and I are sitting here having a chat, do you ever forget that there are people out there listening?
Oh, right. Yeah. But I will say I do remember pretty quickly when you drop a questionable or inappropriate statement once in a while.
Yeah.
That I'm like, God, people are listening.
My co-host was sexist for like 6 minutes straight. Edit. So what I strive for in my interviews when we talk, when we have our guests on and stuff, I just want to get the public to understand and know them a little bit better and to just have an honest, real conversation. And just to get down to it.
And you do a good job at it, too. I love that.
Thank you. Not searching for compliments. I'm just trying to get an honest interaction. And when I was talking to Rob the other week, I forgot that there are people out there. And I got an email from our good friend, Stephen King, the director of the incredible Des Moines Arts Festival.
Yes.
I got an email from him. He's like, so when you asked Rob why he moved to Des Moines, why did you say Des Moines like you had a dandelion in your mouth? So, I told him, the truth, which was that I had a huge musical number about Des Moines. It was like, I love Des Moines. And I did this whole thing and I was dancing. And then you said I was pitchy and cut it. And then you interspersed Des Moines of me saying it derisively. And that's what happened. It's your fault.
Bullshit.
Oh dear.
No. Everyone knows I am actually originally from Iowa, born and raised in Dubuque. And so I find that people who aren't from the Midwest tend to have a disdain for the area. So that's on you.
I bought a property in the Midwest. I adore Minnesota and adore the Des Moines Arts Festival, so... Yeah. If that came off in any way negatively, many apologies to the great city of Des Moines and the great state of pig farming Iowa.
Really, really well. That's what you want to say there. That's
It's like, are you serious? Point? This is what you're going with? Roll it.
That's right.
Run it.
So we got a great talk that I recorded with Athlone Clarke last week. Amazing artist, and he's a really cool guy.
We sit there and we try to come up with who we like to talk to, and it certainly is not hard. We have such a varied, incredible community, but sometimes there are people that come along that you or I will suggest, and the other one of us will be like, oh my God, yes, holy shit, how have we not had? So right. Athlone is one of those artists. I was lucky enough to be across from him at Gasparilla a few years back and had a pretty cool talk with him. And it'll be incredible for everybody else to hear his story and kind of his views. He's got some pretty deep thoughts on the art show industry and just art in general. So
yeah, I love when he talks about having two bodies of work, because I think that every art show artist who makes a living out on the road rides that line between what is sellable and what is like he says, like looking into the abyss, the dark waters of what he wants to express from his soul. And he did have a story about some of that work not going over too well with the director. That he said, this is a little bit too controversial. We'd like you to take work down. That's going to be an interesting conversation I think people will enjoy hearing about.
I can't wait for everybody to hear that part of the story and that part of the talk. And if you guys have any comments or have ever experienced anything like that, we love to kind of interact with listeners. If you want to post something up on our Facebook page or respond any of your thoughts or experiences too. So without further ado, let's just jump right into your talk with Athlone Clarke. I can't wait for everybody to hear.
This episode of the Independent Artist Podcast is brought to you by Zap, the digital application service where artists and art festivals connect.
Hey, Will, do you remember the old way of doing these applications with red dots on the slides and self-addressed stamped envelopes?
Do you still have a rotary phone, Douglas? No, I don't remember that.
Well, I just like that they were with us back then when we made the switch from analog to digital.
It's a huge switch, and now Zap is the industry standard.
And they're always creating features that make our lives easier too. So I do like what Zap does, and I do like that most of the shows I apply to are on Zapplication.
Exactly. So I personally appreciate what Zap is doing, and thanks for not making us reinvent the wheel every single week like we used to have to do.
This week we have a youthful arts festival to promote. This particular show, I feel like I'm on the dating game. At 97 years young, it's originals only and runs in the beginning weekend of June. Who are we talking about, Douglas?
We are talking about Rittenhouse Square Fine Art Show. And it's not just the 97-year-old show, it's both shows. This is a call to entry for their June show and the one in September.
People will argue about which one is better, but when that is the case, it just means it's a great show across the board. Did you ever see The Servant on Apple TV?
I have not.
It actually takes place right around those neighborhoods of Rittenhouse Square. Gorgeous area, affluent Philadelphia, inner city suburb, if you will.
Love
and
it.
Just really cool homes.
And this one is an originals only show, no reproductions allowed.
And not just only originals, but no functional work either.
That's right. The focus is on fine art. And one other thing that makes this show pretty darn remarkable, it's a show run by artists for artists, so they know what's important to you.
The deadline for that June show, June 7th through the 9th, is coming up. Best get on
We're
it.
talking January 9th, and for the September show, which is September 20th through the 22nd, that deadline is March 11th.
Athlone Clarke has been a proud exhibitor at that particular festival. He's our guest this week.
Yes.
If you want to see the kinds of work, check that out at their website, which is...
That's RittenhouseSquareArt.com. And come on, what are you waiting for? Log on to Zap and get your application in. Athlone, I am so happy you're here with me today on the Independent Artist Podcast. I'm really happy we'll get to know each other a little bit better through the course of this conversation. So welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on your program.
Sure, you bet. Well, I guess let's start from the very beginning. Let's go back to Jamaica and your origin story. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of your upbringing?
Well, I was born in Jamaica 67 years ago. I grew up in a little place called Spanish Town, which is, I'd say, 13 miles out of the city of Kingston. So it's kind of considered, at least back when I was growing up, somewhat rural.
Rural, okay.
And also idyllic in the sense that, it was a very close-knit kind of community. And not to sound cliche, but everybody knew everybody. And, there was this sense of community. I'm not sure what it's like these days, but I suspect a lot may have changed.
You were used to being in a community of people who kind of everybody knew each other and you felt the support of the community and everything.
Absolutely, without question. I went to high school there, a school by the name of San Diego High School. After high school, I went off to college, studied for a few years. After working professionally for maybe 5 to 7 years, I decided that it was time for me to try something else. And so, to be perfectly honest, I was at odds in terms of the focus and maybe even the discipline of the profession that I was involved in.
And what was that profession?
I graduated as a lawyer.
Okay, gotcha.
I practiced for a few years, but in all honesty, I think I kind of did it as a way of making my father proud, because I was his only son at that time. He was a prison officer and, of very humble circumstances. And he put all his effort in making sure I was properly educated. And I had what he considered to be a bread and butter profession, which basically means, a profession where the chances of making it were much greater.
So art was not something that he was behind or supportive of?
To a certain extent. I remember when I was much younger, possibly in my preteens, I grew up with just him because my mother had been deceased.
Okay.
I would do little sketches because she considered herself an artist, but not a professional artist. She was mostly a dabbler, doing little sketches and so on and so forth. So
Okay.
I kind of saw art as a way of kind of communicating with her. In high
Oh.
school, I was probably one of the few students who kind of studied art at what we call the advanced level. But the funny thing was that the art school, or the art class, I should say, was behind the school, meaning that all the science labs and the important classes were held in the main building. The art building was way in the back. And that kind of sent us, I guess you'd say, a subliminal message that
Right.
art was just a filler. It was not that important.
Hmm.
For some reason, I always found myself completely at ease there with the other so-called misfits.
Hmm.
I developed this sense of confidence about my creative skills. I can't say the same for my other subjects, because I didn't consider myself necessarily a smart kid. But when it came to art, I was somewhat confident. And at the time, although I didn't know it, it was kind of a cheap therapy for me. We never used the word therapy back then, but
Yeah.
it soothed my soul and made me feel as if I had a purpose. And so I thought I was, relatively good at it. So I studied art at the advanced level.
Losing your mother at such a young age, actually, how old were you when she passed?
She died shortly after she had me. And
Wow. So you never had a relationship with her as a child, no?
well, I had a relationship with her, but I have no memory of her,
All
if
right.
you know what I'm saying, because she loved me
Yeah.
deeply and all of that. So, I sometimes try to tap into what is called the pre-birth memory,
Yeah.
where I try to understand what she might have been like, because she had a choice. She didn't have to, you know, choose me, but for some reason she decided to, and she paid dearly for it.
And what do you mean by that?
She had a weak heart that was weakened by what is called rheumatic fever, and she had
Oh.
had a child before, and she was advised not to have any more children because it would reduce her chances of being alive, of staying alive. Her heart was badly damaged from having that first child that was stillborn.
Mhm.
And so she, I guess, with my father, decided that she wanted to take her chances. And so at some point, I'm told, the doctor, on realizing she was pregnant again, said, well, you can have an abortion now, or you can take your chances. And she decided to take her chances, and ultimate sacrifice she kind of paid with her life. So I kind of grew up, honestly, carrying a lot of guilt for that.
Yeah.
The weirdest part of growing up was I always wondered if I was my stillborn brother who had passed on in childbirth.
Like
If
you'd
if
come back
I had
through.
come back again, that type of thing. So
Wow.
it led me into some very dark thoughts, which for a child that young, I think it may have even twisted my perception of life. I guess, I'm guessing.
Well, there's so many struggles that come from that loss.
Hmm.
Did you have any kind of I know that you had a connection with your mother in, let's say, spirit sense, but in
Hmm.
physical sense, did you have a mother figure here in the present, in the now kind of thing?
Well, indeed, I did. My grandmother, who was her mother, was the most perfect human being up to this day I've ever known. And
Okay.
she showered me with a lot of love, even to the point where people thought that she was spoiling me a bit. And my father, at some stage, people were saying to him, I think she's just too soft on him. He's a boy. You need to get him and teach him, quote unquote, the manly things and so on. At one point, he came to get me. I was living in the city of Kingston with her. He came to pick me up, and I remember just really being pulled apart. In fact, she was wearing a brooch, and I held on to her so tight that the brooch kind of left this scratch in my arm, in my hand, which I can see to this very day. So it
Okay.
reminds me of how close my grandmother was. She was, as far as I'm concerned, she was an angel.
Wow.
But when my father got me, he, good intentioned, took me to live in Spanish Town where he was working, and It was just he and I up at that point. And so he did the best he could, but I don't think he was, he's old school, not necessarily an emotionally accessible kind of guy, but he made sure I had 3 square meals a day and all of that. So anyway, he would encourage me to draw and paint just like my grandmother did, because supposedly these were kind of letters that my mom would understand and read and so on and so forth. Of course, being a child, I believed it. And so that was where my first introduction to art began, because it was a kind of language for me, or a form of communication with my dear departed mom. And so,
wow. Well, I know we'll get to your kind of your art practice a little bit later here, but would you say that was the kind of the initial seeds for you tapping into spirit, the other side, and realizing there is a thin veil between that side and this earthly side?
you nailed it. I absolutely believe that was the genesis of me looking at art, I guess, in a very unconventional way. I'll just jump forward just to make this point.
Okay.
I recently had someone who wanted to represent me. And, in the past, he has been pretty good at it. But we were having a conversation once, and he said, I like the artists that sell. And I didn't say anything at the time, but I kept reflecting on what he said. And I realized that for him, art was just a product. For me, it was a commodity. It was like, you have a farm and you till the soil and you nurture the trees, and then someone comes in and just wants to pluck the fruit. And so he was not really interested in the process as such. He just wanted art that sold. And for me, I know he said it with the best of intentions, but I looked at my practice of art in a deeply spiritual way. I think of myself as the creator, just as there is a God who is the creator. And if we are made in the image of the creator, then I feel blessed to have this talent, this gift to create an idea out of nothing, and to have it manifest in front of my eyes, and to have people who find value in what I do. So I see it as a kind of celestial communication type thing, which I guess I'm very sentimental in that respect. For me, it's more than just a product. It's more than just the finished product. It's the process. It's the evolution. It's the learning. It's the understanding. It's humility. It's all of these, kind of nonverbal things that affects me deeply. So I don't just paint for aesthetics. I paint as a form of therapy, but I also paint as a form of meditation, if you will.
So actually then maybe perhaps the side benefit, of course, we all need to make a living and support ourselves. The primary focus isn't the selling of it. The primary focus is creating true, authentic work, and then trusting that that process you'll be supported in the way that you need from the universe.
I couldn't have said it better.
That's beautiful. And the seeds of that kind of life were planted right at the beginning for you.
Right at the beginning, and at a point where I would imagine growing up without that maternal protection and bonding, there has to be some element of, I suppose, trauma in that. And so, although I didn't at the time consciously think of art as being the salve or the thing that would cure me, it turned out to be that way. I'm not saying I'm completely over it, because every now and again I go back, I see my friends, their interactions with their mothers and so on. I wonder what it would have felt like. But at the same time, I don't dwell on it. I dwell on creating work that can, I guess you'd call a catharsis for all of these feelings.
Yeah. So you said you were steered in the direction to be a lawyer. You graduated as a lawyer and worked in that profession. You came to the decision that this isn't the way you wanted to live your life, and you made a change. Can you talk about that shift?
It's a beautiful profession for people who are good at it. But for me, maybe I was a little bit too scatterbrained, in the sense that I like creating things. Too much paperwork gets me very flustered. I don't like I didn't feel as if I wanted to make a living listening to people's problems and misery and all of that kind of stuff. And maybe in my looking back, maybe I was just being too romantic, I guess you'd say, in terms of how I wanted to make a living.
everything we do in life is a stepping stone to where we need to end up.
This
and
is
I
true.
think that there were benefits you possibly got from that, but there's no need to like have regrets over the fact that it wasn't the right fit, because you are in the spot right now where you ultimately wanted to be.
It was preparation for where I am now. And
Totally.
I have no regrets about going to law school, because I think it gave me, kind of made me more analytic in terms of understanding the things around me, made me a little bit more flexible. And so even these days when I create, I don't just create from just passion. There is a certain analysis that goes on, which I think I inherited from that period of my life.
That's cool. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, there's spontaneity, yes. But, as the old saying goes, spontaneity takes practice. It actually does.
Yeah. So when you decided to make a change in your life, is that what brought you to the U.S.?
My father, when he died, I remember watching his casket going down, and I thought, life is too short to spend it living for somebody else's expectations. And I felt free. I felt like I'm free to pursue whatever it was that was waiting for me in the future. I never said, well, I'm going off to be an artist or anything like that. I just wanted to be free. I wanted to, life to take me in the direction that I was meant to go, or at least give myself a chance of figuring out what was the best fit for me.
Yeah.
And so I decided to take off and come to the States after, I buried my father. And quite honestly, at that time, I wasn't even sure what I wanted to do. I just know that whatever it was would find me.
And that takes a lot of faith.
Yes. Well, thank you. I didn't feel that way at the time. I felt a little bit lost. And a lot of times we hear people move to America for a better life, so to speak. I thought I had a pretty good life in Jamaica, but what drew me here was a sense of adventure and wanting to kind of just see what's on the other side of the fence, to go beyond the borders of the little island that I grew up on, as beautiful as it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I came here, and for a number of years, I just kind of like did whatever I had to do in order to make a living. And, there were times when I would think, what if I'd stayed behind? And, especially when things got very difficult. But luckily, I met this beautiful woman who happens to be my wife.
And her name is?
Alice.
Alice.
Yeah, Alice. Alice, yeah. Her upbringing was, for want of a better word, unconventional. She grew up on the Navajo reservation in Arizona, and, was just had a completely different outlook. And I remember when we just met, I kind of was warning her. I said, I like you, or we care for each other, but honestly, if I were you, I'd run, because I don't think I don't think I'm going to amount to much. I have conflicting thoughts in my mind, and I can be contrary and all of that kind of stuff. And for whatever reason, she decided that she was, willing to take a chance. And so I remember her saying, "Quit looking backwards, because you keep looking backwards, you're going to trip up. Just focus on what you want to do, or find something where your passion resides." And the only thing I could really think of at the time was art, because I love the process of creating. And so I started being a little bit of a dabbler, feeling here and there, having other jobs in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, I kind of found my feet. I found my equilibrium, and I started realizing that I could actually make a living at it. Although initially it was a living just enough to take care of after we got married, take care of our small family. But over the years, it has grown, and I am where I am now.
Yeah. So initially, did you enter into your art practice in a similar way that you are now, or was that an evolution?
It was definitely an evolution. Again, because I had this passion for art, I was willing to see it through no matter where it took me. Mm-hmm. And then with her encouragement, because it's hard enough doing it on your own, but if you have someone who doesn't really see the dream the way you do, it makes it a lot more difficult. And I must say that she was always 100% behind me. And one point I made my living kind of as a freelance writer. And the thing about being a freelance writer is that the money is very sporadic, and you can't really budget and stuff. And she made sure that she held the house down and that the responsibilities were taken care of, just to free me up so I could really think and, expand my thoughts and so on. So that kind of was the foundation of me becoming a working artist, not just a hobbyist who's doing it on the weekend, not just someone who's doing it for, pleasure, but
Yeah,
someone who is able to gain discipline out of passion. So I was both passionate about it, but I also realized that I had to approach it with a sense of discipline and not just willy nilly based on whether I want to paint today or not. So every single
sure.
day I make sure that I put in a certain amount of hours understanding my craft and just approaching it with the same discipline that I approached my profession in Jamaica.
So tell me, I heard a story that you had told about a blind woman who saw your work early in your career, and she gave you some feedback that kind of changed how you thought about your work. Would you like to tell
Mhm.
that story?
Absolutely. And I'll even send you a picture of something recently that happened in Denver, Colorado this year.
Wonderful. Cool.
I think the story you're alluding to is I was doing a show in Atlanta. This lady came up, she was being pushed in a wheelchair, and she came into my space and she was, wearing dark glasses and was focusing on one particular spot. I walked up to her, introduced myself, and I was basically like, "What do you like about my work?" And she was basically saying something to the effect that if I explained to you, I'm not sure you would understand. And I was kind of slightly offended. I was like, why do you think I would understand? I did it. And she said, well,
Hmm.
tell me about your process. And I said, well, what I did was this, what I did was that. And then I moved from this thought and I thought of that and I prepared canvas here and I was going on. And at the end of it all, she said, I love what you do, but I notice you say a lot of I's. I do this, I do that, I do that. And she was like, I think you're more of a conduit. It's something coming through you. And so you can't take all the credit, basically. I can't remember her exact words, but her
Hmm.
sentiment was that, it's not just about what you do, it's about being used as a vessel. At the time I was slightly offended because it sounded like she was kind of preaching to me and kind of
Right.
censoring what I was saying.
And you didn't know that she was blind at that point, right?
No, I
Like,
didn't, because the young man who was pushing her, and I later found out was her grandson. The young man said, well, she's actually blind. So what she's seeing is probably not necessarily what you're seeing. So, she was
mm,
maybe operating on vibrations and all of that.
right.
And, at the time I didn't understand how that worked. So, I was very dismissive of it. I was like, yeah. But as I got older, I realized that she was onto something, because at the time, perfectly honest with you, I was kind of allowing my ego to, you know,
Steer the ship?
give me that sense that it was all about me and what, that
Hmm.
type thing. But she helped me to understand that there are different levels of perception. Mine might be visual, but she being blind, she operated on a completely different, maybe a vibrational kind of perception of what
Right.
was there. And recently, when I was in Denver, I'll send you a picture of it. This young lady
Cool.
came up, and again, she came up with some family members, and the family member came up and said, "Can she touch your work?" And I said, "Of course."
Okay.
And she just kept feeling and feeling and feeling. And I said, "Well, why is she?" And he said, "She's completely blind, but for some reason, she's drawn to your work."
Mm.
And it was the second time that had happened to me. And I was like, "What?" And she said, "Yeah." And then I went up to her and I spoke with her, and she said, "Oh my God, I love your pieces so much." And of course, this time I took the opportunity of explaining to her the various objects that I worked with and all of that. And she was gracious enough to let me take a picture of her while she was feeling and
Wow.
touching the work and all of that. So I'll send you a picture of that.
I would love that. So this is a different woman who's blind and also reacted in a very similar way.
Very similar way. And it was like 30 years later, or maybe 25
Wow.
years later, or something like that. But it humbled me also, because I realized again that, sometimes as artists, we can be ego driven.
Yeah.
We tend to overlook certain people because we judge them based on the things that we're capable of doing. But it
Yeah.
takes kind of a level of humility to understand that there are people out there who are just as perceptive and just as vibrant and as smart, but they may not necessarily do so through the five senses that we claim to have. And
Yeah.
so it really humbled me and brought me to a point where I understand that I'm just kind of a conduit. I'm a servant. I'm a vessel for something that is much, much bigger than myself.
Well, isn't it interesting that that is the process you work in? And we all go through these periods of where we feel really like confident in the process that we do, that we feel good about it. But then there might be times where we question it or second guess it. And this experience, almost like a mirror of the past, comes in at this point in time and lets you know that it's being received from a spiritual, visceral way as well. Even though you've been doing this for this long, you know what I'm saying? It still rings true.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you're a mixed media artist and you base a lot of your artwork or the themes or the imagery in your artwork around objects you find. Can you talk about how you connect with objects and how they are an integral part of your work?
Well, before I explain that, you use the term mixed media artist, and of course, for simplicity, that's what I am.
Mm-hmm.
But going a little bit deeper, I kind of just work with whatever is available in the sense that people have said to me in the past, well, you should have a style where if you're downtown, let's say Beijing, and somebody sees your work, they know it's an Athlone Clarke, or if they're in Europe and they see your work, they know it's an Athlone Clarke, or whatever. I look on people like Marcel Duchamp or Robert Rauschenberg, or, I can come up with several people who they're not confined to a particular style or a particular label. They just work with whatever is available. And I would like to see myself like an artist who, just like I don't have the same thing for breakfast every morning, I don't necessarily feel I should participate in the building of my own prison by confining myself to a particular medium or to a particular label.
Gotcha.
So I just do what I want to do. And so, I can put two of my paintings side by side and they look completely different. And I know it's confusing for some people, but I have to be authentic in terms of my own feelings. And I can't just do it because I want things to match, or I work, but it's pretty much the same with except for a few variations so people can readily and quickly identify my work.
I totally get that. And I love that as soon as you slap a label on it, it's like a box you've now painted yourself into that say you want to step outside of that. It's like, then do you have to redefine who you are? Well, if you don't have those restrictions, then you are everything. You are nothing. You're all of it. You can be whatever. And it can be a daily surprise as to how you are inspired or what direction you want to go in.
Very beautifully said. And the way I approach it is that when I'm finished with a piece, I want it to be as much as a surprise to me as it is to someone who's looking at it for the first time. I like the element of surprise. And so if I start having these scripts in my mind or these sketches in my mind, then it's like I'm following, a particular idea slavishly without being true to my own personal direction. And again, I don't wear the same thing every day. I don't eat the same thing every day. And so I feel I have to approach my work with the same sense of adventure. I sometimes see myself as kind of, I guess you'd say, a research scientist. You'll have the doctor out there who makes a lot of money and he's, let's say, a plastic surgeon.
Yeah.
But I'm that guy who I'm in the lab and I'm working with different kinds of medicines. I'm mixing things. I'm experimenting and all of that just to see what comes out. And so it's a different kind of creative process for me. I like experimentation. That's what keeps me alive. To answer your question more directly, I thoroughly enjoy working with found objects because, particularly old objects, because I feel as if they have inherited these stories in them. And as I said to you when we had spoken earlier, we live in kind of a modern throwaway society where as soon as something is not functional, we toss it to the side And
That's true.
unfortunately, we do it with people too. When they're no longer useful to us, we kind of toss them aside.
I'd say, and in some respects, some things are created with the idea of being thrown away because of this capitalistic world we are in. It's then you can keep the money spiral going. You know what I'm saying? So we do
Exactly.
discard things very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And so I find these old objects, and my house is almost like a landfill because I pretty much never throw anything away. My wife sometimes sweeps my little studio, and I'm digging through the stuff that she swept aside, trying to find things that I still want to keep.
Yeah.
I cherish these objects because I think each one has a story. And I feel that with patience and with time, they will reveal their stories to me. And I include them in my work because I think it infuses a kind of energy in my work, whether it's nostalgia, somebody sees a piece that, oh my God, I grew up with those old curling irons or whatever. And, it kind of creates that language that they can identify with. And I feel it's also, I guess, metaphorically speaking, it's a way of me breathing new life into things that most people would toss away or most people would overlook. I find them and I say, thank you for the work that you have done. Now I'm going to give you another opportunity to shine. And so I find them and I use them in my work. Like, some of these pieces behind me, pieces of bone, pieces of wood, little vase here and all of that. And I just bring them together, and I think it enhances my work. And I think I'm honoring the stories of these objects in a creative way. And selfishly, it gives my work depth, and it creates a kind of complexity that I find to be very attractive. Yeah, I'm definitely a found objects artist, and I do paint. I enjoy painting, but then sometimes I just want to hammer two pieces of wood together and, throw some wire over it and just sit there and admire it. That's the kind of artist that I would like to be, or that I am.
Well, tell me about the Japanese philosophy where an object develops a soul.
I'm not going to try to pronounce it in Japanese.
Sure.
I think I would butcher it, but it's part of the Shinto religion, I believe.
Okay.
Where they believe that an object that has lasted over 100 years inherits a kind of soul. And if you find that object and you're patient enough, that object will reveal itself to you in its stories. And so, as I said to you earlier, I will have 10 different objects from different parts of the world, or that have completely different functions. But I sit there and I study them enough to, make sure they're compatible, if you will. Just like in a choir, each choir member has maybe a different voice or a different melody, but the conductor or the choir master is able to bring all these disparate voices together and create one massive, beautiful piece of art. And so that's kind of what I do. So it comes down to a piece that is greater than the sum of its parts, if you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
It creates this beautiful melody, visual melody of ideas. And so again, in Japan, they have this reverence for things that have lasted for a very long time. And the example I gave, it's like having a pot that has cooked delicious food for your family for decades. But now that pot is old and black and beaten up and has, holes in the bottom of it. The first impulse would be to throw the pot away in the garbage or something. But then somebody who is aware of that service or that the sentimental value of that pot will say, rather than throwing it away, let's use it as a container for plants. Let's put some plants in it. It has holes in the bottom, so it will be perfect for putting a mint tree or a beautiful flower in it. So that pot now changes its identity and creates a service for something that is completely different from what it was used for before. I hope that kind of explains it.
Okay. Do you feel like in that process of using these objects as sources of inspiration, that, as the Japanese say, it develops its own soul? Or do you think that the energy from the people who've used it or connected with that object throughout the years kind of becomes infused into it? And do you feel like you're picking up that aspect of it, or is it all of it? Is it really the whole, the story of its life, basically?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think it becomes a repository for those people who have worked with it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that has atoms in it basically is alive. That's the way I see it. A rock, piece of stick, it has atoms, it's alive. So even though it might be a pot made of aluminum or whatever, there's a certain level of life in it.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, humble ourselves to not be dismissive, but to really study it and connect with it. There's an old saying, it takes an uncommon man, or I should say an uncommon person, to see the beauty in common things. So things that we see that are invisible to most people.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really uncommon in your thought process, you can see beauty in it, or you can find the beauty that lives in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about being famous or anything like that, but it's about finding a repository for your energy, finding something that will outlive you once you have transitioned this planet.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of what I'm striving for. If my work ends up in somebody's basement or in their garage, as long as it inspires, someone, or someone finds beauty in it, I feel that that's my version of what eternal life is.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your process. And the process is so personal. I understand that. I don't want you to give away your too revealing or whatever. When you're working with the pieces, I know what's really important to you and your work is that it comes from an authentic place. And so I know that we can't always be, let's say, in a calm, happy place. Sometimes we're in a worried state. Sometimes we're in a different state. How do you work when your process is so driven by this integrity and authenticity, when there might be days that you're not exactly where you want to be in that moment?
I think some of the greatest novels that have been written don't necessarily have a happy ending. I think it's a little bit idealistic to think that every day you wake up, you want to paint and it's going to make you feel good and you're going to feel fulfilled and all of that. But I think discipline is not feeling as if you want to do it, but doing it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
The problem I used to have, and maybe to a small extent now, is that having to make a living, let's say at the festivals, you kind of don't want to go too dark. You know what I mean? Because,
right.
For the most part, you're catering to people who want to hang a happy painting over the fireplace or something like that.
Okay.
I have two bodies of work, and I have the work at home where I really put my angst and my whatever might be tormenting me at that particular time.
Right.
I use my work in a cathartic type of way, and I create these pieces that are very intense and whatever.
Okay.
I don't always take these pieces out to shows.
Right.
At the same time, I don't confine myself to happy paintings.
Right.
But I also know the difference between something that is really dark and something that is kind of tolerable. And I have to make a living. And so what I do is that I create work that if for the festivals especially, you stand in front of it, you can feel the authenticity, you can feel the integrity in the piece, but it's not exactly like a lynching scene.
Yes.
I have paintings. I remember once when I was kind of naive and I thought, to hell with what people think, I'm going to do what I want to do. And at the time I was very troubled about stories that I've heard about lynching in the South and all of that.
Right.
And I created a piece that was very dark and it was called Blood in the Well Water. And I took it to a show, and the reaction, the organizer came and asked me if I could remove it because it was really upsetting a lot of people.
Wow.
And at the time I was like, what are you talking about? Like, it's art, I'm freely expressing it. But then, you mature and you understand that you still have to be pragmatic in terms of how you move forward. People are at these venues, not necessarily to take part in your pain or in your angst, but to find a certain degree of pleasure. And, the painting was creating a kind of, it was shaking people up to the point where they were not comfortable. And so I never did it again, only because I understood that I don't necessarily have to put everything out there that I feel, and so I create two bodies of work. I create the work at home where, when I'm feeling tormented, when I'm feeling, angst driven, I pour it all into this piece. But not to say that this piece is hidden, but there are certain venues that are specific for that particular piece. Let's say if I have a gallery show, well, when you come to a gallery show, it's my show. So, just you take whatever is there, you take whatever you get. I'm not going to censor myself at a gallery show because it's my expression. But when I go to these public venues, I have to be a little bit more circumspect about, the kind of work that I put out, not to mention the fact that I'm also trying to make a living at it.
Right.
So,
and you don't want to have confrontation at every turn in your booth, having to explain your pain and the source of the pain that is, across many people that is depicted in your work. So it's like picking the time and place to share that kind of work.
Absolutely. And it becomes a little bit of a distraction as well as a spectacle.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily why I'm out there, you know what I mean? But again, I try not to censor myself. So I create this other body of work that is somewhat private. And I have private collectors who that's what they want to see. And so, when I have like a solo show in Atlanta or whatever, I send out my invitations. People come and they support what I do, but it's not necessarily something that is accessible to the public at large. So that's how that works. But as far as process is concerned, I go from moment to moment. I don't really work with sketches in my mind or whatever. I find that spontaneity, going from moment to moment and creating work that I consider to be spirit driven. That's basically it, In terms of processing, I find cloth, I find a nice, like a piece of drop cloth, and I'll go outside and I'll smear it with mud and I'll spray all over it. And then I like aging things, even things that are new. I like adding certain patinas to them and so on. So, it's kind of a mixture of all kinds of a form of alchemy, if you will.
Okay. Do you feel like you have to get into a real particular emotional, spiritual state to start your work, or is it so accessible to you that you could basically just step into your studio and it's readily at hand for you to have that creative flow happen?
My daily practice is like the pages of a thick book. Each page is so delicate and so thin, but the practice of doing it day after day after day, the book begins to get thicker and thicker and thicker. And so someone seeing the finished product will think that you sat there and you did it all at once, or how brilliant you are. But some of those pages are not as profound as other pages, which means the days that you wake up and you don't necessarily want to do it, but there's a lesson in that particular day for you.
Yeah.
There's a lesson sometimes that says, how badly do you want to express yourself? Or what is it that is holding you back? And why are you feeling this way? Why are you anxious? And you still have to find a way to work through those days. So for me, it's a practice. It's a lifestyle. It's not just a way of making a living. It's a lifestyle. And so I might add, with a lot of Black artists throughout the world are brilliant people, but have died without the recognition that they should have gotten. But they were so driven by the need or the compulsion to create that it didn't matter. And they're gone, but the work still remains behind to inspire. And I think the most inspiring work sometimes are the ones that you didn't feel like you wanted to do. And so you did it and you got over that obstacle. And now it is there to inspire generations.
You just said something that I think I understand, but I want to flesh it out a little bit. You said so many Black artists, because perhaps of their race, they weren't being acknowledged or recognized for their skill and talent until after they've passed in this current day, this current time. Is that what you're saying?
For example, in Africa, you have some of the most brilliant African artists who have since passed on. Top price for their work might be $100,000 at auction. And then you look at a European artist or some artist who lives in the West who does the same work or might have even copied that work. We never hear of them. For example, Picasso, he himself said, great artists steal, poor artists copy, was his quote.
Okay.
He definitely leaned very heavily. Some might even say he has stolen the Cubism out of Africa, but he got the credit. He was considered the father of Cubism.
Right.
But for the early Africans who experimented and brought Cubism to the fore, nobody has heard about them. We don't even know who they are.
Right.
And so they're like swept off in the dust heap of history. But he gets all the credit for discovering Cubism. So that's what I mean. It's a form of institutional racism.
For sure.
And it's a way of, just kind of belittling or completely ignoring the contributions of Black artists to the development as art as a whole. And so I kind of feel like some of those artists, while they were creating, they realized that there's a great likelihood that nobody will ever hear of them or even know of their contributions, but they did it anyway because they're driven by an urge that goes beyond just recognition.
Right.
The recognition is good, but that should not be the thing that drives you. The urge to create is what should drive you. At the same time, the recognition helps you to make a living and support yourself and support your family and, enjoy some of life's comforts. So, yeah.
So in spite of like the struggle and the not being recognized, that art, that process was more of an authentic place.
Yeah.
Authenticity is the hook for you, and perhaps in the other examples you're talking about.
As an artist, you have to find what really inspires you. And, I try my best never to knock people's creative process because not everybody wants necessarily to go deep or, be provocative or whatever. Some people just like beauty. They just want something that will make the house feel light and beautiful.
Right.
I guess that kind of work is commonly described as home decor. But there's room for that too, because again, life is not always about looking into the abyss. Some people like, things that are easy to understand and color coordinated and all of that, and much respect to them. But for me personally, I like to go a little bit deeper. I like to look into the abyss. I like to, challenge myself. I create work that if you were to put it over the fireplace, it might not be considered to be polite art. And that's okay too. And so, the trick is to be authentic to who you are and to be respectful of other people's work and to understand that we all have different functions. We all have a different role. We all have a different responsibility as artists. Some people like to do things that are deeply political. I've done that too, but I'm not trying to die on that hill.
Okay.
I also do work that I consider even whimsical. I like doing whimsical stuff from time to time. So, you just have to find what makes you want to wake up in the morning. That's how I try to live my life.
Sometimes when we talk about our process and what is important to us, we feel like it is somehow perhaps a statement on what we think all, like, let's say art or what is valid art or good art or whatever. And that isn't the case. It's usually just talking about ourselves and the direction where we want to go. So sometimes it's hard to be fully open about how we feel about things because we're like, we don't want to offend artist X because they do a different process than what we do, sort of thing.
It would be naive not to admit there's a certain degree of elitism in art, where sometimes tend to look down on the creative process of others. I've had so many people that come to my booth, I'll ask them, I said, so are you an artist? And they're like, oh, no, I couldn't even draw a blister from a hot iron. I'm not, I'm not an artist. And I say, how do you know? And they're like, well, I don't have any kind of artistic inclination or whatever. And I try to tell as many people as I can that you have a voice. You don't have to try to be a Monet or a Picasso. It's not about really being internationally famous or like a Ratcliffe Bailey or a Jacob Lawrence. Even if all you can do is draw a line, draw the best line you can. It is your line, and somebody who understands what a nicely drawn line looks like will find some kind of comfort in that line that you drew. It's not a competition. It's not saying, well, if I paint, nobody's going to like it. You like it. And so look at it as a form of therapy for you. We all have different ways of expressing ourselves. And, I look at a guy like Jean Dubuffet. He just gets his paintbrush and he, in the moment, just makes these circles that you look at and think a 3-year-old could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, a 3-year-old could do it because Dubuffet said what inspired him was that he would go to these elementary schools, or for want of a better word, kindergarten,
Mm-hmm.
and he would buy the work from these little 3 and 4-year-olds, and he would take it home and he would study it. And that was what inspired him, because he realized that work is coming from a place of innocence that has not yet been corrupted, by the need to make money and commerce and all of that. Don't get me wrong. I think everybody deserves to make a good living at it.
Yeah.
But the reality is that not everybody does. But you shouldn't let that stop you. Find something that gives your spirit that freedom of creation, something that is uniquely yours, so that when you have left this life, you will have left your fingerprint on the wall of life to say that I was here. You know what I mean? So it's not so much about being famous or anything like that. It's just about breaking out of the expectations of others and just basically freeing yourself to do something that will free you up, even if it's a stick figure, anything. Get paints and just splash it on a piece of board, a paper, canvas, whatever, and look at that almost as your own love letter, or as a love letter to yourself. So, I think this sense of elitism that lives in the murkiest part of the art world had people questioning themselves as to whether they have a voice or whether they are good enough to be heard. If you're good enough to breathe, you're good enough to be heard.
Right.
And so I try to encourage as many people as I can to say, find something that really makes you want to wake up in the mornings, and use that as a repository for your frustrations, for your joys, for the happiness you feel, for the gratitude you feel, all of that. Pour it into that thing, whether it's a song, whether it's a poem, whether it's a painting, whatever. Find that thing that becomes your voice.
One of the things that I find interesting is you said you are a writer and you are a visual artist. It seems like the writing serves to enter like mythology into some of your pieces. And I find the subjects of a lot of your pieces super interesting. Like you were telling a story about a piece where there was a man in the image of a spider, and I believe you referred to that mythological creature as the Nancy. Am I understanding that right, or do I remember that correctly?
Anansi, yes.
Anansi,
yes.
Okay. And tell me about it.
So I grew up hearing Anansi stories in Jamaica, but I later found out that it actually comes out of Africa.
Okay.
And it's just about a guy who, he's a little bit of a trickster. He's a spider, half spider, half man. And there's lots of stories about Anansi in the folklore of Jamaica, and I suspect the Caribbean, but most definitely in Africa, which is where the story originated.
Okay.
But to give you an example of how he may appear tricky, but there is depth in his deception, and there's virtue in his deception. So, for example, one of the tenets of Anansi is play the fool to catch the wise. Play the fool to catch the wise. Well, what does that mean? Sometimes you have to appear naive, stupid, out of touch, for people to reveal themselves to you. Because if they know you're smart, then they kind of sit up and they put forward their best self. But if they think you're stupid, then you're more likely to see the cracks. You're more likely to understand if they're being genuine or if they're being hypocritical, because they don't think that you have the capacity to see through the facade. They don't think you have the capacity to see past the mask that they wear. And so sometimes it's not, you're in a crowd, it's not a crowd of people you want to impress. You don't necessarily have to do a lot of talking. Just sit there and let them think you're dumb. And you probably learn a lot more than if you intimidate them by showing them how smart you are.
Right.
And so, for me, I find Anansi to be a brilliant being. Yeah, I like the idea that people will see me, let's say at shows, and they'll come up and they'll say, "Is this your work?" Yeah, is that really your work? Yeah, it is. Why do you think it's not? Oh, well, you're kind of clever, like I'm some kind of trained monkey or something like that. But, they become very condescending,
Really?
But it helps me to understand who they are and the perceptions they have of people who are, let's say, of a different color or a different background. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I know how to move when I'm dealing with these people. But, like you had asked me about being a lawyer, that's not something I lead with, because that's not even relevant in my life as it is.
Right.
I'm a working artist. That's what I am. But I also have a sense of perception and discernment. I see things for what they are, and I have a gift of understanding people's nuances very quickly. And I think that's part of the Anansi folklore that inspires me.
Okay, so another piece I found a lot of deep connection to that I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about, and that was the piece that you have the boxer's gloves, and the title of it, or the writing on the piece itself, says "Bred for Pressure." Would you be interested in talking about that piece?
Yes. Again, as a artist of color, or Black artist, if you will, and not just as an artist, but I just as somebody who is in many respects considered an outsider, because I was born elsewhere, I came here, and there's some people who, even among my own people, who will kind of see me as not American enough. I'll find that sometimes, even though the word blacklisted might not be used, that you get excluded from certain things because of color, because of nationality, all of these things. It forces one to develop a thick outer skin, and to use those arrows or use those weapons that are used against you. You turn them into, I want to say, a positive experience, but as the old saying goes, you use the lemons to make lemonade, and you strengthen yourself, and it makes you resilient and formidable, because there's some people who, when they go up against pressure, the spirit gets broken, and so they give up easily.
Okay.
And that includes people from every background. There's some people who can only take so much, and then they're like, oh, forget it, and they move away, whatever. I don't feel I have the luxury to do that. I feel as if, especially to create an example for my kids, I have to be formidable. I have to learn to push through. I have to use those lemons and make the sweetest lemonade I know how to make.
Yeah.
And so, that's what Bred for Pressure is. I've my upbringing in Jamaica, from, a relatively humble background, maybe in some people's minds not expected to grow up to be much, but still forging ahead, still trying to, as I said earlier, leave my fingerprint on the wall of life.
Yeah.
Still being able to support my family and make sure my kids are properly educated, make sure my family has options. All of these things come as a result of being that fighter, pound for pound, round for round, being bred for pressure. And so that's kind of where that comes from. Basically, never giving up. And not just for me, but I've learned from, a lot of what I'm saying to you here. It's not just me gleaning these lessons out of the atmosphere or whatever.
Right.
I have a wife as I find her very inspiring. And not because she's my wife, but if I'd met her under different circumstances, I still would have found her to be very inspiring.
Okay.
She's very strong. She doesn't talk as much as I do. She has that silent resilience spirit about her. And, there are times I go into very dark moods, but she's always very light and very playful. She says to me, she's always wanting to go on walks. Let's go for a walk here. Let's go for a walk here. And I'm, I go to the gym. I don't want to go walk, whatever. Come on, let's go walking. And at one point I used to be like, see it as a chore. We go walking 2-3 miles or whatever. And I'm like, why are we in the middle of the jungle? Why are we in the woods or whatever?
Where did we end up
when
here?
Are we going to get there? Yeah. And then her thing was, she didn't say it, but by watching her, I realized that I tend to be destination oriented. Her walks is not about destination. Her walks are about exploration. She doesn't really have a destination. She's just exploring. She's very much into nature. It used to be the favorite part of the walk for me was heading back to the car. And for her, it was just finding beauty in a little rock. She's from a nation that's called the Navajo.
Okay.
And they're out in the Southwest. And one of the Navajo sayings is walk in beauty. And for a long time, I didn't understand the heck what that meant, walk in beauty.
Yeah.
But as I'm older now and I've studied her over these years, I realize that she finds beauty in the simplest things. She laughs easily. She has never had a bad word to say about anybody. She's just always, even to my annoyance, she's always so zen. When I'm like, well, why aren't you screaming or whatever? She's like, everything is going to be cool or whatever. And it took me a long time to understand that. So she epitomizes someone who has learned over the years how to literally walk in beauty in everything that she does. And so I kind of watch her, and I've learned from her over the years how to, not worry about so much getting to the destination and heading back, but to just explore one step at a time and, take life in small doses. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so amazing to have that in your life. I would say is influential in your work and in your overall kind of thought process, it sounds like.
Yes, you're absolutely right. This might sound a little bit corny, and yeah, I am corny at times, but
corny is fine.
Again, as I said to you earlier on, I didn't have a mom. I loved my grandmother deeply, and they're now both gone on. There are times I feel as if they have come back to me through my wife.
Wow.
Because she has that kind of spirit about her, always patient. And trust me, I'm not always the easiest person to live with. I can be moody and, I go into these dark phases at times and all of that, and impatient at times.
Yeah.
I've learned so much from watching her that I feel almost like it's my ancestors, those who loved me and wanted to see me and my family do well. They have come back around and they have used her as kind of a guiding tool for me. And I consider myself, if nothing else, on my deathbed, I will know for sure that I have stumbled a lot in this lifetime. But the one thing I am absolutely sure of, without any doubt in my mind, that I found the woman that is most compatible for me, a woman who has taught me how to see life in a much more positive and, just a beautiful soul, an uncommon soul. And I think I have been fortunate and blessed in that respect. If nothing else, if I were to die tomorrow, I know for sure that I had a good marriage.
Wow.
That gives me the inspiration to keep moving forward.
That's really beautiful. Alice sounds like an amazing influence for you and for the world.
She is.
Well, as we sign off here, I notice when I've gone through your social media and when we've communicated back and forth through text that you end your sign-offs with the phrase "one love." And that interests me. I'm curious what that means to you.
It's a term that's been used in Jamaica for long before Bob Marley.
Okay.
It's kind of a Rastafarian greeting. but he popularized it. I once had a girlfriend who hated when I used it. She was like, oh, it's so corny or whatever. What I think she did not understand that it's not just a cool thing to say. It's not just a trendy thing to say. It's not just an idealistic expression of whatever.
Right.
It basically, in my mind anyway, it says one creator, one planet, one family, one love.
It's all of it.
I probably get in trouble for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Racism, for the most part, can be profitable. There is money to be made in separating people and having them suspicious of each other.
Okay.
And if you get over the bridge of learning to speak with people who look different from you, who come from a different background, then a lot of the issues that we experience, the negative issues that we experience, it's probably never going to completely disappear, but at least you will have some level of empathy for, your brother or your sister, regardless of where they're from. And if you scrape the politics and everything away, now mind you, as Black people, yes, we do need to get together and be united and to stand as one voice, because Lord knows we have been brutalized, we have been exploited, we have been overlooked, all of these things. But at the end of the day, if you scrape all of that away, it's one humanity. A race is kind of an artificial construct. If you can get to the point where you can see us as just one family, let's say tomorrow we got invaded by aliens from space and they're zapping people, and we're not necessarily thinking, oh, he zapped a white man or he zapped a... We're thinking, well, as a family of this planet of Earth, we have to do something to defend ourselves.
Right.
There's always profit to be made in division. Among Black people, you look at those who are light colored, dark skin, whatever. You go to India, you look at the difference between the Muslims and the Hindus, and and it just goes on and on and on. There's always separation. And so there are those who are able to exploit that separation and make it very profitable by the concept which is known as divide and conquer. No, I'm not naive. I'm not saying that we're all tomorrow going to hold hands and sing "We Shall Overcome" and all of that. I'm not saying that, but you have to have a higher ideal than just looking at people as other than. That's just what one love represents. One love, just a family. We're one family on this planet.
Well, don't you think, like you're saying, we will never heal as a world if we keep operating from the pain of the past? And you're right, that does sound like a trite, kind of like Pollyanna kind of thought, but there has been power in keeping marginalized groups fighting amongst themselves so that they can't rise up. And so I feel like in your explanation, it really allows healing to happen and for change. And whatever that means, it's a step forward as opposed to a step backward.
Absolutely. I mean, what is the likely outcome of this division? Some would say equality. Yes, I agree. Equality. Everyone wants to be treated in a positive and equal way. Everyone wants their children to be well fed and have a safe place to sleep. We all kind of want the same things. Yes, we have been exploited. Make no mistake. Africa has been literally, want of a better word, plundered. But at some point, we have to realize that even if in a perfect world we were all to get together, for those of us who want to find something to fight about, there will always be room for division. There will always be room to make your brother your enemy. And, we have to get beyond that, because if we can't transcend that, it's all going to be chaos. It's going to be chaos. It will never end. It will always be something else. And, I know I might come off as, again, too naive, too idealistic, but what is the alternative? Where's the solution? I don't know, man. Again, I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for saying this, but so be it. you know.
That's right.
I look at my wife, for example. She's of a different race than I am, and yet for me, she's the kindest human being I've ever run into. I look at my children; they're biracial. At least three of them are.
Mm-hmm.
I love them as much as more than my own life, you know. And I try to raise children that are productive and that are tolerant and that will just kind of accept people for who they are. But maybe that's not trendy, and maybe one day we look back and realize that there is something to be said for those who try to transcend this kind of tribalism, if you will.
Definitely. Well, we've touched on a lot of really amazing topics here, and I really appreciate your forthcoming and from the heart conversation. This has really been a meaningful one for me. So thank you so much, Athlone, for joining me and sharing everything about you with me and the listeners. So this has been a really great conversation. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for having me. If I'm guilty of rambling, please forgive me. I get caught up in my thoughts sometimes and I tend to ramble on, but my intentions are good.
Rambling is good. I've been known to ramble.
I thank you for taking the time to give me a chance to express myself. I enjoy your podcast very much, and I will make sure to spread the word that people can get a part of this wisdom that you're imparting. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, man. All right.
Peace.
Bye-bye.
Peace.
Great talk with Athlone Clarke. Douglas, thank you so much for bringing his voice to the airwaves and letting the folks out there understand and learn a little bit. Really killer talk. I could not have enjoyed that more. Thank you.
It's cool at the end there how we kind of circled back to a theme that we talked about last year at this time,
right?
Which is that idea of, the art is not a competition.
Right.
And it feels like this time of year, it weighs heavy on a lot of us because we're getting those applications back and we're trying to draft our season and our year. And we start to feel a little bit like that FOMO that we're missing out on opportunities we wish we could have done or gotten into. And he really did a good job of laying that whole concept out of just doing ourselves and letting that shine.
Yeah, I think that's an important message for this time of year, especially kind of closing out our year on the podcast. And I mean, we're pretty much jumping right back into it next year. But at the same time, I feel like in our industry, more than just about any other, the art industry, it really does have an end cap of the year. The years are different,
Yeah.
What you do is going to be different. Where you go is going to be different. The shows you decide to do versus the shows that decide you can. It just is what it is. And it's up to you. It's like, oh, well, this is the year I drove from, Miami to California. This is the year that I didn't do as many shows. So it's always interesting to think back on the year in review, really, and see how it did and how you do things differently or how you see yourself doing things.
And I'd like to say that this is going to be a unique year for me, but it turns out it's going to be the same year I had last year, where I'm basically recovering for 4 or 5 months, and my first show of the year is going to be in April. So
wow.
Those 2 years in a row are totally different than how I've operated all the other 23 years of doing our art fair business.
Yeah.
We've been working on stocking up everything we're going to need so that our first show, we're ready to walk right out the door, which is different than what we did last year. I mistakenly thought that during this recovery period, I'd be able to make work for those first few shows.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that this year.
Good.
When I shut my studio down, we are going to be ready for our first show in April. That's
Excellent.
the plan.
All right.
Yeah.
You're going to be chomping at the bit to record a bunch of interviews, I bet, and breathing down my neck.
Or maybe I will become remarkably adept at doing nothing. We'll stay tuned and see what happens here.
That's how I like to live. Do it. Take up meditation and whatever it takes to get through. Hey, listen, folks, we do have one more episode left in the year. We're going to do some, just kind of like I talked about, just do kind of a year in review and talk about some things, some hot topics. If you do have ideas and things like that, log on and
share those with us. We'll have a little thread there on our Facebook page. Also, if you're in a typing mood, we are trying and hitting our goals in growth for the podcast. It's invaluable when you share the episodes with your friends, as well as posting reviews on Apple. That is a way of beating the digital monkeys into submission. So
the meta algorithms will help us out. So
better way to say
get the word out, man.
Yeah.
All right. Well, next time you hear me, I might be a little dozy on my painkillers, but we'll be good. We'll be good. So have happy holidays, everyone, and we'll talk to you before the end of the year.
Sounds good.
This podcast is brought to you by the National Association of Independent Artists. The website is naiaartists.org.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. That's zapplication.org. And while you're at it, find us on social media and engage in these conversations.
Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when we release new episodes.
Oh, and if you like the show, we'd love it if you would give us your 5-star rating and offer up your most creative review on your podcast streaming service. See you next time.